I'm here. Hello. I'm here. Welcome to Frankenstein Tea, daily short story program for adult listeners from the Island Free Library on Block Island. With me at the library. Oh, there's Judy. She's doing some copying behind me. Oh, that could be a patron. Who else is in here? Oh, that could be someone out the door. Anyway, hello. I'm here. I have a story for today. How's everybody doing? There was a moment of blue sky and a glint of sunshine. Seems to be gray again, but that could be my glasses. No, I think it's gray again. But all is well on Block Island. It's Tuesday, February 16th, 2021. The library is back open for the week. We are open Tuesday through Saturday. And so today is our Monday, and we're just getting into the groove of things. It is also Block Island School February vacation. So, if we have staff that have kids in the school system, they're going to be in and out a little bit this week. But we're here and we'll be open. If you're on island, definitely you can come in and pick up some materials, books, DVDs. Oops, let me shut that. Books, DVDs, puzzles. I know I'm on I think I'm on puzzle number 5. I just had a really good run of it. The first 2 I did, I'm on puzzle number 5, because the first 2 I did were missing pieces, totally frustrating, and I got rid of them. The second 2 I did had all the pieces, and now this one that I'm doing, I'm pretty sure is missing at least one piece. It's one of those very I have the sky and the snow left to do, which are sort of the light blue and white, kind of like my penguins here. Those coloring, and I'm missing a very distinct dark blue and brown piece. So I'm pretty sure it's missing. Bummer. But I think I'm just going to buy a whole bunch of new puzzles for the library and do them, and then hope that I'm not the one losing the pieces. Hi to my dad. He just signed in. Hi, Dad. Thinking of you all up there. I'm going to read a story here today on Frankenstein Tea, which I try to do, Frankenstein Tea, daily short story program for adult listeners. And in the month of February, we're celebrating Black History Month. And I'm going to read something from this anthology, Children of the Night, the best short stories by Black writers, 1967 to the present. It's not quite the present, right? We've discussed this before. This book is getting old. But what I did want to tell you today is that this book is divided into sections, parts. So part 1 is remembering. Part 2 is affirming. Part 3, revealing the self-divided. And part 4, moving on. And I've read from this book before and not shared with you the parts, but today I wanted to share that, and I'm going to read from part 1 today, which was remembering. And within that part, I'm going to read a section from slavery. I'm going to read John Edgar Wideman. The title of his short story within this collection is Dambala. Dambala, Damballah. It was copyrighted in 1981 by Random House Vintage Books, a division of Random House. John Edgar Wideman. Dambala. And when I read this, this is one of those stories. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to cross my legs under this table with my boots on, and it's not easy. Oh, I'm almost there. Okay. When I read this to myself, I was trying to edit out Nigger. I don't usually read that out loud on this program. And there's different schools of thought on that. Some people read it out loud as part of the story, like I shouldn't be editing this man's work. and it's part of the power and the impact of the story. But that's difficult for me, so I don't always do that. But this is a little bit of a tricky story. So, well, it's tricky in a lot of ways. So it may be helpful for me to read that word just to keep the story going. I don't really like that. So to tell you the truth, I'm not even sure how it's going to go right now, but we'll see. The last few stories I've read where that word has come up, you've heard me say, right? Is what I do. And maybe I'll just do that as opposed to editing this man's work with other words like black man or old man or that person or young boy, because there's several references. Several times that word is used. So let's see how it goes. But Poppy, pay attention. This is a hard one. You might have to listen twice. I know I don't really get it, but that's okay. We can listen twice. This is my second time reading it. Maybe I'll get it more. I mean, some of it I get. It's hard. As if, something about slavery wouldn't be hard? Doubtful. This is from the section Slavery. John Edgar Wideman. Dambala. Orion let the dead gray cloth slide down his legs and stepped into the river. He picked his way over slippery stones till he stood calf deep. Dropping to one knee, he splashed his groin, then scooped river to his chest, both hands scrubbing with quick, kneading spirals. When he stood again, he stared at the distant gray clouds, a hint of rain in the chill morning air, a faint, clean presence rising from the far side of the hills. The promise of rain coming to him as all things seemed to come these past few months, not through eyes or ears or nose, but entering his black skin as if each pore had learned to feel and speak. He watched the clear water race and ripple and pucker. Where the sun cut through the pine trees and slanted into the water, he could see the bottom, see black stones, speckled stones, shining stones whose light came from within. Above a stump at the far edge of the river, clouds of insects hovered. The water was darker there, slower, appeared to stand in deep pools where tangles of root, bush, and weed hung over the bank. Orion thought of the eldest priest chalking a design on the floor of the sacred obi, drawing the watery door no living hands could push open, the crossroads where the spirits passed between worlds. His skin was becoming like that in-between place the priest scratched in the dust. When he walked the cane rows and dirt paths of the plantation, he could feel the air of this strange land wearing out his skin, rubbing it thinner and thinner, until one day his skin would not be thick enough to separate what was inside from everything outside. Some days his skin whispered he was dying, but he was not afraid. The voices and faces of his fathers bursting through the wood would not drown him. They would sweep him away, carry him home again. In his village across the sea were men who hunted and fished with their voices. Men who could talk the fish up from their shadowy dwellings and into the woven baskets slung over the fishermen's shoulders. Orion knew the fish in this cold river had forgotten him, that they were darting in and out of his legs. If the whites had not stolen him, he would have learned the fishing magic, the proper words, the proper tones to please the fish. But here in this blood-soaked land, everything was different. Though he felt their slick bodies and saw the sudden dimples in the water where they were feeding, he understood that he would never speak the language of these fish. No more than he would ever speak again the words of the white people who had decided to kill him. The boy was there again, hiding behind the trees. He could be the one. This boy born so far from home. This boy who knew nothing but what the whites told him. This boy could learn the story and tell it again. Time was short, but he could be the one. That Ryan, he a crazy, one of them wild African, act like he fresh off the boat. Kind you stay away from lest you looking for trouble. Aunt Lissy had stopped popping string beans and frowned into the boy's face. The pause and the steady drumming of beans into the iron pot, the way she scrunched up her face to look mean like one of the master's pit bulls, told him she had finished speaking on the subject and wished to hear no more about it from him. When the long green pods began to shuttle through her fingers again, it sounded like she was cracking her knuckles, and he expected something black to drop into the huge pot. Fixin' to rain hard. Heard them frogs last night just a-singin' at the clouds. Frog and all his brothers callin' down the thunder. Don't rain soon, them fields dry up and blow away. The boy thought of the men trudging each morning to the fields. Some were brown, some yellow. Some had red in their skins and some white, as the Master Ryan, black. But Aunt Lissy blacker. Fat, shiny blue-black, like a crow's wing. Sure enough crazy. Old woman always talking and telling silly stories. The boy wanted to hear something besides an old woman's mouth. He had heard about frogs and bears and rabbits too many times. He was almost grown now, almost ready to leave in the morning with the men. What would they talk about? Would Orion's voice be like the hollers the boy heard early in the mornings when the men still sleepy and the sky still dark and you couldn't really see nobody but knew they were there when them cries and hollers came rising through the mist? Pine needles crackled with each step he took, and the boy knew old Ryan knew somebody spying on him. Guess who it was, too. But if Ryan knew, Ryan didn't care. Just waded out in that water like he the only man in the world. Like maybe wasn't no world. Just him in that quiet place in the middle of the river. Must be fishing out there, some funny old African kind of fishing. Nobody never saw him touch victuals master set out, and he had to be eating something, even if he was half crazy. So he must be fishing for his breakfast, standing there like a stick in the water till the fish forgot him and he could snatch one from the water with his beaky fingers. A skinny-legged black water bird in the purring river. The boy stopped chewing his stick of cane, let the sweet juice blend with his spit, a warm syrup when whose taste he prolonged by not swallowing, but letting it coat his tongue and the insides of his mouth, waiting patiently like the figure in the water waited as the sweet taste seeped away. All the cane juice had trickled down his throat before he saw Orion move. After the stillness, the illusion that the man was a tree rooted in the rocks at the riverbed, when motion came, it was too swift to follow. Not so much a matter of seeing Orion move as if feeling the man's eyes inside him, hooking him before he could crouch lower in the weeds. Orion's eyes on him and through him, boring a hole in his chest and thrusting into that space one word, Dambala. Then the hooded eyes were gone. On a spoon, you see the shape of a face as an egg. or 2 eggs, because you can change the shape from long oval to moons pitched together at the middle seam, or any egg shape if you tilt and push the spoon closer or farther away. Nothing to think about. You go with mistress to chest in the root cellar. You go with mistress to the chest in the root cellar. She guides you with a candle, and you make a pouch of soft cloth and carefully lay each spoon, and careful it don't jangle as up and out of the darkness, following her rustling dresses and petticoats up the earthen steps, each one topped by a plank which squirms as you mount it. You are following the taper she holds and the strange smell she trails and leaves in rooms. Then shut up in a room all day with nothing to think about. With rags and pieces of silver, slowly you rub away the tarnished spots. It is like finding something which surprises you, though you knew all the time it was there. Spoons lying on the strip of indigo. Perfect, gleaming fish you have coaxed from the black water. Dambala was the word. Said it to Aunt Lissy, and she went upside his head harder than she had ever slapped him. Felt like crumpling right there in the dust of the yard, it hurt so bad, but he bit his lip and didn't cry out. Held his ground and said the word again and again, silently to himself, pretending nothing but a bug on his burning cheek, and twitched and sent it flying. Dambala. Be strong as he needed to be. Nothing touch him if he don't want. Before long, they'd cut him from the herd of pickaninnies. No more chasing flies from the table. No more silver spoons to get shiny. No fat old woman telling him what to do. He'd go to the fields each morning with the men, holler like they did before the sun rose to burn off the mist, work like they did from can to caint, from first crack of light to dusk, when the puddles of shadow deepened and spread so you couldn't see your hands or feet or the sharp tools hacking at the cane. He was already taller than the others, a stork among the chicks scurrying behind Aunt Lissy. Soon he'd rise with the concorn and do a man share, so he had let the fire rage on half his face and thought of the nothing always there to think of. In the spoon, his face long and thin as a finger. He looked for the print of Lissy's black hand on his cheek, but the image would not stay still, dancing like his face reflected in the river. Dambala. Don't you ever, you hear me, ever let me hear that heathen talk no more. You hear me, boy? You talk American, boy. Lissy's voice like chicken cackle, in his head a barn packed with animal noise and animal smell. His own head, but he had to sneak around in it. Too many others crowded in there with him. His head so crowded and noisy lots of time, don't hear his own voice with all them braying and cackling. Orion squatted the way the boy had seen the other old men collapse on their haunches and go still as a stump, their bony knees poking up and their backsides resting on their ankles. Looked like they could sit that way all day, legs folded under them like wings. Orion drew a cross in the dust. Dambala. When Orion passed his hands over the cross, the air seemed to shimmer like it does above a flame, or like it does when the sun's so hot you can see waves of heat rising off the fields. Orion talked to the emptiness he shaped with his long black fingers. His eyes were closed. Orion wasn't speaking, but sounds came from inside him the boy had never heard before. Strange words, clicks, whistles, and grunts. A sing-song moan that rose and fell and floated like the old man's busy hands above the cross. Dambala, like a drumbeat in the chant. Dambala, a place the boy could enter, a familiar sound he began to anticipate, a sound outside of him which slowly forced its way inside, a sound measuring his heartbeat, then one with the pumping surge of his blood. The boy heard part of what Lissy sang to Primus in the cooking shed. Ryan, he yelled that heathen word right out in the middle of Jim talking about sweet Jesus, the Son of God. Jump up like he snake bit and scream that word so everybody hushed, even the white folks that came to hear Jim preach. Simple Ryan, standing there at the back of the chapel like a knot poked out on somebody's forehead, looking like a boy caught with his hand in the chicken coop, screeching like some crazy hoot owl, while Preacher Jim praying the word of the Lord. They're going to kill that boy, that simple boy, one day. Dear Sir, the boy Orion, which I purchased of you in good faith, sight unseen, on your promise that he was of sound constitution, a full-grown and able-bodied house servant who can read, write, do sums, and cipher, to recite the exact words of your letter dated April 17th, 1852, has proved to be a burden, a deficit to the economy of my plantation, rather than the asset I fully believed I was receiving when I agreed to pay the price you asked. Of the vaunted intelligence, so rare in his kind, I have seen nothing. Not an English word has passed through his mouth since he arrived. Of his docility and tractability, I have seen only the willingness with which he bears his leatherish back to receive the stripes constant misconduct earn him. He is a creature whose brutish habits would shame me were he quartered in my kennels. I find it odd that I should write at such length about any, but seldom have I been so struck by the disparity between promise and performance. As I have accrued nothing but expense and inconvenience as a result of this presence, I think it only just that you return the full amount I paid for this flawed piece of the Indies. You know me as an honest and fair man, and my regard for these same qualities in you prompts me to write this letter. I am not a harsh master. I concern myself with the spiritual as well as the temporal needs of my slaves. My Jim is renowned in this county as a preacher. Many say I am foolish, that the words of Scripture are wasted on these savage blacks. I fear you have sent me a living argument to support the critics of my Christianizing project. Among other absences of truly human qualities I have observed in this Orion is the utter lack of a soul. She said it time for Orion to die. Broke half the overseer's bones, knocking him off his horse this morning, and everybody thought Ryan done run away, sure, but mistress come upon the crazy one at supper time on the big house porch, naked as the day he born, and he just sat there staring into her eyes till mistress screamed and run away. Aunt Lissy said Ryan ain't studying no woman, ain't got near to woman since he has been here, and she says his ain't the first black butt mistress done seen all them nearly grown boys walking around summer in the onlyest shirt master give 'em, barely come down to they knees, and men and women don't get draws the first. Mistress and master both seen plenty. Wasn't that she was scared, wasn't what she saw scared her less. She see the ghost leaving out of Ryan's body. The ghost wouldn't steam out the top of Orion's head. The boy remembered the sweaty man come in from the fields at dusk when the nights start to cool early. Remembered them with the drinking gourds in their hands, scooping up water from the wooden barrel he filled. How they threw their heads back and the water trickles from the sides of their mouth and down their chin and let it roll on down their chests and the smoky steam curling off their shoulders. Orion's spirit would not rise up like that, but wiggle out of his skin and swim off up the river. The boy knew many kinds of ghosts and learned the ways you could get round their tricks. Some spirits almost good company, and he filled the nothing with jingles and whistles and took roundabout paths and sang to them when he walked up on a crossroads and yoo-hooed at doors. No way you fool the haunts if a spell conjured strong on you. No way to miss a beating if it your day to get beat. But the ghosts had everything in their hands, even the white folks in their hands. You know they there. You know they floating up in the air watching and counting and remembering them strokes, old master laying across your back. They dragged Orion across the yard. He didn't buck or kick, but it seemed as if the 4 men carrying him were struggling with a giant stone rather than a black bag of bones. His ashy weight swung between the 2 pairs of white men like a lazy hammock, but the faces of the men all red and twisted. They huffed and puffed and sweated through their clothes carrying Ryan's bones to the barn. The dry spell had layered the yard with a coat of dust. Little squalls of yellow spurted from under the men's boots. Trudging heavy steps as if each man carried 7 Orions on his shoulders, 4 grown men struggling with one string of black flesh. The boy had never seen so many white folks dealing with one man. Aunt Lissy had said it time to die, and the boy wondered what Ryan's ghost would think dropping onto the dust surrounded by the scowling faces of the master and his overseers. One screamed that night, like a bull when they cut off his maleness. Couldn't tell who it was. A bull screaming once that night, and torches burning in the barn, and master and the men coming out, and no Ryan. Mistress crying behind a locked door, and master messing with Patty down the quarters. In the morning light, the barn swelling and rising and teetering in the yellow dust, moving the way you could catch the ghost of something in a spoon and play with it, bending it, twisting it. That goldish ash on everybody's bare shins. Nobody talking. No cries nor hollers from the fields. The boy watched till his eyes hurt, waiting for a moment when he could slip unseen into the shivering barn. On his hands and knees, hiding under a wagon, then edging sideways through the loose boards and a wedge of space where the weathered door hung crooked on its hinge. The interior of the barn lay in shadows. Once beyond the sliver of light coming in at the cracked door, the boy stood still till his eyes adjusted to the darkness. First, he could pick out the stacks of hay, the rough partitions dividing the animals. The smells, the choking heat there, like always, but rising above these familiar sensations, the buzz of flies, unnaturally loud, as if the barn breathing and each breath shook the wooden walls. Then the boy's eyes followed the sound to an open space at the center of the far wall. A black shape there. Orion there, floating in his own blood. The boy ran at the blanket of flies. When he stomped, some of the flies buzzed up from the carcass. Others, too drunk on the shimmering blood, ignored him except to join the ones hovering above the body in a sudden droning peal of annoyance. He could keep the flies stirring, but they always returned from the recesses of the high ceiling, the dark corners of the building, to gather in a cloud above the body. The boy looked for something to throw, heard his breath, heavy and threatening like the sound of the flies. He sank to the floor, sitting cross-legged where he had stood. He moved only once, 10 slow paces away from Orion and back again, near enough to be sure, to see again how the head had been cleaved from the rest of the body, to see how the axe and tongs, branding iron, and other tools were scattered around the corpse, to see how one man's hat and another's shirt, a letter that must have come from someone's pocket, lay about in a helter-skelter way, as if the men had suddenly bolted before they had finished with Orion. Forgive him, Father. I tried to the end of my patience to restore his lost soul. I made a mighty effort to bring him to the ark of salvation, but he had walked in darkness too long. He mocked your grace. He denied your word. Have mercy on him and forgive his heathen ways as you forgive the soulless beasts of the fields and the birds of the air. She say, Master, still down Slave Row. She say, everybody afraid to go down and get him. Everybody afraid to open the barn door. Overseer half dead and the mistress still crying in her locked room, and that barn starting to stink already with crazy Ryan and nobody gonna get him. And the boy knew his legs were moving, and he knew they would carry him where they needed to go, and he knew the legs belonged to him, but he could not feel them. He had been sitting too long, thinking on nothing for too long, and he felt the sweat running on his body, but his mind off somewhere cool and quiet and hard, and he knew the space between his body and mind could not be crossed by anything. Knew you might as well try to stick the head back on Ryan as try to cross that space. So he took what he needed out of the barn, unfolding gently his gangly crane's legs together under him, and shouldered upon the creaking double doors, and shouldered open the creaking double doors, and walked through the flame in the center where he had to go. Dambala said it be a long way a ghost be going, and Jordan chilly and wide, and a new ghost taking his time getting his wings together. Long way to go so you can sit and listen till the ghost ready to go on home. The boy wiped his wet hands on his knees and drew the cross and said the word and settled down and listened to Orion tell the stories again. Orion talked and he listened and couldn't stop listening till he saw Orion's eyes rise up through the back of the severed skull and lips rise up through the skull and the wings of the ghost measure out the rhythm of one last word. Late afternoon, and the river slept dark at its edges like it did in the mornings. The boy threw the head as far as he could, and he knew the fish would hear it and swim to it and welcome it. He knew they had been waiting. He knew the ripples would touch him when he entered. Dambala by John Edgar Wideman. Frankenstein Tea, as we continue to celebrate Black History Month. Thanks for coming. I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.